Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The bells of St. Bartholomew's Episcopal carried across the square and slid under the Spanish moss like a low tide. I climbed the stone steps with Caleb's hand in mine, the air warm and damp enough to hold a scent of cut magnolia leaves and old floor polish. Savannah has a way of making grief feel historic, as if sorrow has been here longer than any of us. The ushers in dark coats opened the red doors, and the sanctuary took us in cool, dim, high-ceilinged fans, creaking overhead stained glass, washing the pews in small lakes of color. On the center aisle, a magnolia wreath hung from an iron stand. Beyond it waited the casket, oak, closed to strangers until the service, but arranged now with a photograph of my daughter propped beside it. Lily was 28 in that picture hair caught by river-light mouth, half open as if she were about to laugh at something I hadn't heard. The world loves to freeze you on your brightest day and forget the rest. Grandma Caleb's voice was smaller than I remembered it being last week. The shirt I'd ironed for him at dawn slipped over his wrists and his collar tilted like a question. 7 is old enough to sense a room is fragile and too young to know what language won't break it. "I'm right here, sweetheart," I said, guiding him forward. "We'll sit on the left." People pressed in around us, neighbors from our block, women from Lily's book club, a pair of Brandon's co-workers stiff in their ties. Condolences rose and dissolved soft as moths, leaving a powdery hush. The organist ran a gentle scale. A choir mother in a black dress knelt to fix a candle that had guttered and leaned back to life. Brandon stood near the first pew, hands knitted so tightly the knuckles shone. His eyes met mine and slid away. A man can wear a suit like armor, but a gaze is only ever a window. He nodded toward me as if making room rather than offering comfort. I took the space without asking permission. We sat. I smoothed Caleb's hair, felt the heat of his scalp under my palm, and realized I hadn't stopped moving since the phone rang 2 days ago. The rector stepped to the lectern, voice level and careful, a prayer about rest and green pastures and a shepherd who loses nothing. The words lifted, tried to hold, and fell. Caleb tugged my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, eyes fixed on the front. "Mom's tummy looks bigger." The sentence tilted the room. My mouth went dry. "Shh," I said, but he had already slipped from our pew, small shoes, tapping the aisle, that stubborn, heart-forward step Lily used to have when she wanted to prove something only she could see. "Caleb," I hissed, standing, but the boy was already at the casket, fingers like bird bones on the polished edge. The funeral director to the side, Kendra Pike, a woman with a ledger and a steady stare, shifted as if to intervene, then stilled. The hymn ended on an unresolved chord. With a child's plain courage, Caleb reached for the satin coverlet and pinched the seam. He didn't yank, didn't tear. He only lifted the hem of the fabric an inch enough to let light from the votive candles inch forward as well. What I saw knocked the breath out of me so completely, I had to catch the pew to keep from sitting down without meaning to. Under the white dress, Lily's favorite, I knew it by the delicate stitching along the bodice. The gentle slope of a young woman's stomach should have been smooth. It was not. A dark bloom spread across the lower abdomen, not the wide map of a fall, not the pale scrape of a misstep, but a concentrated storm purple drowning into black where the light couldn't reach. The skin looked tight-edged there, a bruise that had chosen a single place to live and taken it. The sanctuary held its breath. Someone's rosary clicked once and stopped. A man coughed and turned it into a throat clear, but the sound ricocheted and died. The fans kept their slow confession. "Caleb." Brandon's voice had too much steel for a church. He was already moving down the aisle, already reaching not for the fabric, but for the boy. He set a hand around our grandson's upper arm and eased him sideways with a pressure that wasn't gentle. To everyone else, he managed a half smile. "Buddy, we don't touch anything, okay? Not today." Caleb's face crumpled, bewilderment collapsing into tears he tried to swallow. He looked up at me over Brandon's sleeve, and I saw the same wide, startled eyes Lily had when thunder cracked over the river at night and she was 5. It should not be possible to remember 2 children at once. It's okay, I told him, and stayed where I stood because moving felt like admitting the room had the right to dictate what was true. My hand was on the casket now. The wood was cool, humming with the organ's leftover vibration. Lily's picture faced me, and for a moment I expected the photo version of her to step down and say, "Mama, stop staring. You're making me nervous." Brandon turned, arranging his body to block the view. If he meant to protect dignity, he had chosen the wrong method. Kendra took 2 steps forward and met my eyes, a question flashing there. "Do you want me to?" I shook my head half an inch. "Not yet." The rector began again, voice softer, like he wished he could throw a blanket over the whole congregation and put us to sleep until sorrow wore itself out. The whispering started in the choir loft and drifted down like dust. The women in Lily's book club leaned together, earrings brushing black wool. A neighbor covered her mouth with 2 fingers. A man in Brandon's row stiffened feet planted on the hymnals he hadn't noticed were under the pew. I know what a fall looks like. I have lived in houses with stairs that bite and curbs that grab ankles. Savannah's bricks are beautiful and mean. But this did not speak the language of clumsy. It spoke the language of force. Caleb's crying hitched and went quiet. He pressed his wet face into my hip, and I smoothed the back of his shirt until the fabric lay flat. "You're okay," I said, and I might have been lying, but it was the only currency we had. The rector invited us to pray. Heads bowed like fields in a wind. Mine did not. I watched the candles. I watched the magnolia leaves, their glossy green catching and releasing the light. I watched the place on Lily's dress where the satin lifted and settled back into place as if nothing had happened. The sanctuary returned to its script tones, measured, hands-folded grief performing itself so it wouldn't fall apart. Brandon released Caleb and returned to the front shoulder, squared jaw held. His gaze found me again, fast, hard, a glance that asked a question he didn't want answered. The organ rose into a hymn I had sung at more funerals than I care to count. The notes climbed and fell and climbed again. I set my palm flat where the wood met the brass handle and let the grain answer my skin. The bruise stayed behind my eyes, a negative image that would not fade when I blinked. Somewhere a door clicked as a latecomer slipped in and stood by the back wall. A magnolia leaf big as a hand tipped from its wire and dropped soundlessly to the runner. The fans kept turning. The bells outside kept their clock. In the cool dim of St. Bartholomew's, I held on to the casket to keep my balance, and I did not look away. The hymn ended, and the rector's benediction folded over us like a quilt someone had forgotten to wash. People rose in a rustle of cloth and grief, then drifted toward the narthex, their voices turned to whispers the walls would keep. I stayed where I was until the aisle thinned. Caleb held onto my skirt, small and stubborn, the way a sapling clings when the wind decides to test it. "Kendra," I said when the funeral director came near, her ledger tucked to her side, "I need a moment with my daughter, not here." She studied my face the way a good seamstress reads fabric, the grain, the give, the stress that will split a seam if you pull wrong. "There's a preparation room behind the sacristy," she said. 10 minutes. I'll ask the rector to hold the doors." We slipped through a side door down a narrow corridor that still smelled of Christmas brass polish. The small room had a metal table no one was going to call a table, a sink, a cabinet of linen, and a clock that didn't tick so much as watch. The light was clean and unforgiving. Kendra's assistant, a quiet man with kind hands, lifted the satin coverlet with the ceremony everyday work requires. Up close, the bruise had nothing to hide behind. The margins were hard, the color gone old plum in the center, and oil slick at the edges, the way fruit darkens where a thumb once pressed. There were no scrapes on Lily's elbows, no hairline cuts along the hairline, no swelling at the temple. The skin of her stomach told its own story, and it wasn't about clumsy steps and bad luck. Kendra didn't touch me, but she anchored the air. "Mrs. Hart," she said softly, "I can't make pronouncements, but I can tell you what I've seen over the years." She left the sentence there, a bridge I could walk if I wanted. I did not cross. It wasn't her job to say the words I already heard. Caleb edged forward. I put an arm out without looking and felt his forehead meet my wrist. "We're going now," I told him, my voice doing that steady thing when steadiness is borrowed. Kendra lowered the coverlet. The assistant smoothed the fold. The clock watched us leave. Outside, Savannah's heat met us like a hand over a mouth. The magnolia wreath still held its shine, but a single leaf lay on the steps, a green ear listening to words no one would say out loud. People parted as we moved through. Some squeezed my shoulder. Others aimed at comfort and hid apology. Brandon spoke to a cluster of men from his office. His tie was straight, his eyes not. "I'm taking Caleb home," I told him when we stood close enough to trade breath. "He needs rest." A true sentence that did not exhaust the truth. Brandon nodded as if we were logistics. "I'll come by later for his things," he said. "I have to meet the cemetery." He didn't ask where home was, which told me he wasn't listening. We walked to my car, the heat shimmering in the lot like bad news. Caleb fell asleep before I cleared the square. I drove with both hands, careful as if the lane lines were laws of physics and not paint. At my house, I carried him inside and laid him on the sofa where Lily had napped after high school track meets, long legs thrown over the arm, bobby pins seating the cushions. I covered him with a quilt my mother pieced from shirts too good to throw away and sat until his breathing dropped into the deep, easy rhythm children trust the world to keep. When the house was quiet enough to think, I moved through my kitchen with the ghost of habit kettle cup, the tin of tea that always tastes like imitation of something simpler. Steam fogged the window over the sink. Behind the fog, the camellia bush leaned toward the glass the way it always had in wind. I had nothing like appetite and made toast anyway because grief is body work and bodies need tasks. The call I placed to Brandon was short. "Lily's room," I said. "I'll pack her clothes." There was a pause long enough to place a small prayer inside, then a clipped, "Do what you need to do." Permission cleared without interest. He didn't offer to meet me there. I didn't invite him. The house on Habersham had good bones and the bad kind of silence. The entryway held a console table with a dish for keys and a stack of glossy magazines no one reads. Lemon cleaner rode the air on the edge of something sharper, the way hospitals store the smell of yesterday under the fluorescent. I let myself in with the key Lily had once slipped into my palm with a laugh. "Just in case I lock myself out, Mama. There are jokes the future will not tolerate." Her room faced the live oaks. Afternoon light fell through blinds in reliable stripes. The bed was made with military neatness Lily had never prized until she married a man who ironed his jeans. On the dresser, a hairbrush took the shape of the hand that had used it that morning. That wasn't bristles showing a few dark strands she would have laughed about shedding. I opened the top drawer and found the small wooden box by Feel Boxwood smooth initials burned into the lid LH with a craft store tool that left the letters both precise and domestic. Inside, a card printed with Riverfront Women's Health along the top and Lily's name clear as a bell. 12-week prenatal check date circled. A strip of ultrasound prints curled from being tucked where no light had reached, a small gray ghost floating in a universe of static. A folded sheet torn from a legal pad. Lily's handwriting a little crowded the way she wrote when she tried to outrun her own second thoughts. Cramping again, not telling Mom yet. Brandon said I'm overreacting. I'll ask Dr. N if it's normal. Under that, another square of paper, this one bearing only 3 words framed by the pressure of the pen, "We need to talk." Something slid inside my chest and did not find a place to land. I put the papers back in the order she had made and slid the box into my bag, where it nudged my hip as if to remind me to keep breathing. On her nightstand, her phone lay on its charging pad screen dark. I pressed the side button. The lock screen lit with 3 missed appointment reminders from Riverfront and a voicemail transcription banner titled, In that neutral medical voice, preparation for first trimester visit. The patient portal had sent 2 messages the day before the hospital, both unread. I left the phone where it was. There are lines you don't cross when the house is full of thresholds you didn't choose. Riverfront Women's Health sat in a low building 2 blocks off Victory Drive with a brass plaque out front someone polished every morning. The waiting room held women in sundresses with bellies like skylines over their laps, a wall-mounted TV without sound, a rack of brochures with soft words made clinical by bullet points. I set my bag on my knees and threaded my fingers through the strap until my knuckles went pale. When the nurse called my name, she didn't call Mom or Mrs. Hart so much as she called a place to set something heavy. "Dr. Nandakumar can see you now," she said. The doctor's office was the kind of neat that tells you the person keeps promises. Framed diplomas, a ficus that had been watered before it begged, a desk with a carved wooden paperweight in the shape of a river stone. Dr. Priya Nandakumar had kind eyes and a voice that didn't bend for effect. She shook my hand like we were 2 people and not an ocean and a drowning. "I can't share private health information without consent," she said before I asked a thing. "But there are facts I can state as the physician who saw your daughter when she arrived, and as a human being who understands what it is to be a mother." I nodded. Words when they came would be the wrong ones. "She arrived with signs of intra-abdominal bleeding," Dr. Nandakumar said. "There were no external head injuries, no fractures. The trauma was localized to the lower abdomen. The pattern we saw is consistent with a concentrated external impact. We attempted to stabilize her. We did not succeed." The room knew how to be quiet. I learned alongside it. "She was 12 weeks," I said. It wasn't a question, but my voice lifted like one. The doctor inclined her head. "There were prior records, prenatal intake reminders. I can't discuss those in detail. I can say she had scheduled care." Her eyes moved just for a second toward the edge of my bag, where the corner of the wooden box showed a flicker that wasn't accident. "Her husband asked that we expedite the release. He declined additional diagnostics." "Is that common?" I asked. "It happens," she said, a sentence that carried more than it told. I stared at the clean line of the desk. The ficus leaf nearest my elbow had a tiny bite out of it, maybe from a day the plant wanted to remind someone it was alive. Dr. Nandakumar slid a tissue box toward the edge of the wood. I didn't reach for it. There are gestures that make a moment disappear too quickly, and I wasn't about to let this one evaporate. When I stood to go, she rose with me. "Mrs. Hart," she said, and stopped. "There are words even physicians have to measure. If you find you need to sit somewhere that isn't your own kitchen, you can sit here. My nurse will know." Outside, the late light of Savannah laid itself over the parking lot in sheets. A mockingbird on the clinic sign announced a territory no one argued with. I set the wooden box deeper into my bag until the leather hit it, then rested my palm there, a cover I could provide when others had not. I walked to my car with the steady carefulness a person uses when the ground is more honest than the people walking it. The key turned. The engine caught. I put both hands on the wheel and looked at the road until the lines resolved into something a person could follow. I drove home from the clinic without the radio. Traffic hummed its indifferent hymn trucks rolling toward the port azaleas, blurring pink at the corners. At a red light, I put my hand over the wooden box in my bag, the way you steady a sleeping child when the car turns. The light changed. I went. On my street, the live oaks threw shade the shape of ribs. I parked under the same branch that drops leaves right before rain and let the engine click itself quiet. Inside, Caleb had stacked his toy cars nose to tail on the coffee table, a line of red and blue waiting their turn. He looked up like he was testing whether the world had changed again while he wasn't watching it. I kissed the top of his head and set water to boil. Tea is nothing but a decision to be still. A knock came 3 light taps, like someone practicing. Mrs. Carpenter from next door stood on my porch with a casserole covered in foil and an expression that didn't know where to set itself. "Brought this over," she said. You can return the dish whenever. Her eyes went to my bag the way people's eyes go to a bandage. Thank you, I said and meant it. She hesitated, then added, Evelyn, my doorbell camera. Records the sidewalk. Night before Lily. Before, well... There was a commotion. I didn't want to intrude, but if you want to see it, you can. The foil in my hands went warm. I'll come by now, I said. Her front hall smelled like dryer sheets and lemon. She tapped her phone and sent the clip to the TV. The footage showed the street, our 2 drives, the sliver of Lily's front walk. The timestamp in the corner read 9:37 p.m. A car pulled in fast, headlights catching the crepe myrtle like a deer on a 2-lane road. Brandon climbed out, jacket off, sleeves rolled. The audio wasn't clean, but anger has a shape even when words blur. A woman's voice cut through Lily's, high then lower like someone trying to land a plane on a short strip. The camera caught only the edge of the porch, the suggestion of movement through the glass pane by the door, then a dull thump as if a fist had found drywall, silence too round to be empty. A minute later, the porch light went dark. The clip ended. Mrs. Carpenter stood with her arms folded, hands under her elbows like she was holding herself in. I don't know what it proves, she said, but there it is. Please send it to me, I said. She did. I thanked her and carried the casserole back home like it had become the reason I'd left the house. In the kitchen, the kettle was shrilling. I poured water over a bag and watched the color climb. Lily used to drown her tea in honey, 2 spoonfuls and a third for how the day tasted. I took mine straight. A receipt lay half out of the junk drawer like a white tongue. I pulled it free. Whitaker's Pharmacy Bruise Gel Concealer, stick long sleeve shapewear, date stamped 2 weeks back. I slid it under the magnet shaped like a starfish, right between a picture Caleb drew of a green dinosaur and the school field trip permission slip signed in Lily's impatient cursive. The house rearranges itself when you're not looking. The trick is to notice what went where. On Saturday, Harbor House filled with tourists who wanted river light on their plates. I had no business by the water except that sorrow is a tide, and the river knows how to carry weight. I found a table by the window with a view of the promenade. Couples strolled like they'd invented walking. The ferry swung across to Hutchinson like a toy on a length of string. Brandon came in through the side door in a shirt the color the sky gets before a storm pretends to leave. He scanned the room, then pitched his smile toward the woman who rose from a corner banquette. Paige Monroe, the PR face he trotted out for project launches and ribbon cuttings. I'd seen her in glossy photos holding oversized scissors next to men who liked to clap each other on backs. In person, she was careful blouse that refused to wrinkle lipstick that didn't dare smear a laugh, set to the volume of a receipt printer. They hugged briefly, the kind of embrace workplace language invents, so it can pretend to be innocent. They sat close enough to share a napkin and let it be a joke. I held my menu high enough to make a screen out of it and used my phone like everyone uses their phones when they want to be somewhere and nowhere. A woman at the next table took pictures of her shrimp and grits from 3 angles and apologized to the food for none of it. I slid my camera open and let it do its work. No flash, no flourish. Frames of 2 people untangling, smiles they'd practiced. A hand on a wrist, heads bent. The small choreography of people who forget rooms have edges. It took them a full hour to stop pretending they were simply colleagues. When they left, they didn't leave together. He rose first, paid, slipped out. She waited 4 minutes and followed. I counted them without meaning to, as if my mouth had numbers it needed to use up. Outside, I saw them meet again under the shade of a palm and separate once the valet looked up. Some habits need witnesses less than they need a mirror. You can walk anger like a dog and it will still pull. I did not walk it. I let it heal and focused on what I could hold. I printed 3 of the photographs at the drugstore on Abercorn because a picture on a screen is air and paper knows how to be real. The clerk handed them to me without comment, which is the best kind of courtesy. On Monday, I drove downtown and parked across from Cole Development's glass building, the one with a lobby waterfall that tried to persuade you it wasn't built over someone else's idea of quiet. I took a table at the coffee shop on the corner and sat with a black coffee I didn't plan to drink. Time collected the way it does in lobbies and airports and people waiting to be significant for 10 minutes. At 5:13, Paige emerged with a clutch under her arm and sunglasses already in place, though the sun had slid behind a bank of cloud. I stood and met her at the crosswalk. "Ms. Monroe," I said. "Do you have a minute?" She paused, calculating whether refusal would create more trouble than yes. "We have nothing to discuss," she said, but her eyes did the math and came up short. "It's public," I said. Angled my head toward the food truck court by the river, where music drifted out of a tinny speaker and the smell of garlic made the air less polite, less likely to be misread. She followed. We chose a table under a string of lights that hadn't decided whether they were festive or tired. I set my phone face down between us lit so the screen wouldn't sleep. Voice memos have a red line that crawls if you let it. I let it. I slid the printed photos across the table. Paige didn't touch them. She didn't need to. Her throat worked once a swallow that made her lipstick a lie. "You've been through a lot," she said. "I'm sorry for your—" "How long?" I asked. She lifted her chin. "I don't answer to you. You will answer this. How long?" She let out a breath that wanted to be a laugh and failed. "A year," she said, "give or take." "Before or after the wedding?" "After," she said, then added, "because people like her can't keep from qualifying, but feelings don't use calendars." I pushed the ultrasound image onto the stack of photos. Gray swirl, small orbit. Her eyes went to it like they'd been pulled. "You knew," I said. Her mouth opened closed. She wanted a family, Paige said, which wasn't a yes and wasn't a no. "Where were you the night before the hospital?" I kept my voice flat so it wouldn't hold a shape she could hide inside. "At work," she said. "Then why does a neighbor's camera record your car idling on Habersham at 9:40? I lied by omission. The clip never caught her car-only anger's outline. But bluff is a cousin of truth if you don't ask it to stay too long. Her composure wobbled the way a high heel wobbles on a crack in the sidewalk. She looked at the photos again as if a better version of herself might be hiding under the one captured on paper. "I dropped him off," she said. "Brandon. He said he'd left something, then texted me to circle back. I shouldn't have gone. I shouldn't have been anywhere near. Did you see Lily?" Her brows pinched. "She came home early," Paige said. "He told me to wait in the car. I didn't." I went to the door when I heard shouting. She was saying his name over and over like that could shrink the room. He told her it wasn't what it looked like. She said, "It looks exactly like what it is." Paige's hands found each other, fingers knotting at the knuckles. He grabbed her arm. She jerked back. Words got louder. Her throat moved again. He pushed once. I said, "Brandon, stop." He didn't. He hit her. It wasn't... She stopped. She'd been about to say, "It wasn't hard," and had heard it with my ears. She took it back before it changed the air. He hit her low. How many times? Once, she said. Once was enough. The music from the taco truck cut out mid-chorus and started over. A father at the next table licked his thumb and wiped ice cream from a toddler's cheek, while the toddler resisted being improved. The river kept moving as if locomotion itself were a mercy. "You left," I said. "I panicked," she said. He texted me the next morning. "Accident." He said she fell down the stairs. He sounded composed. She gave a small, helpless smile at the word she'd chosen. He told me not to say anything. He said people would think I was trying to make trouble. Her eyes flashed hard for a second, the part of her that had been brought in to manage men doing what they wanted. "I didn't come here to be the villain in someone else's play, Mrs. Hart. You walked yourself onto that stage," I said, and slid the pharmacy receipt across the photos like a final card. Tell me one more thing. Why shapewear? She blinked slow. I didn't buy that, she said. Your friend did, I said. The same week she stopped wearing dresses that knew how to breathe. Paige sat very still. The string lights overhead clicked as they warmed. Do you think this makes me feel better? She said. Not truly a question. It doesn't. I liked her. I did. She was kind in a way I'm not sure I know how to be anymore. Then you tell the truth where it counts. She glanced at my phone. The screen was still lit, a tiny red line crawling toward a number that meant nothing to anyone but a person who would need it. Are you recording me? She asked. I didn't answer. She didn't press. People who manage narratives understand when a narrative is already moving. She pushed her chair back. I have to go, she said. I'm not stopping you. She stood, smoothed her skirt as if order could be ironed back into an evening, and turned to leave. Halfway across the court, she stopped, came back 2 steps, and reached for one of the photos. She didn't take it. She just tapped the corner with a fingernail. He always tilts his head when he lies, she said. It makes him look interested. Then she went, heels measuring the boards like a metronome. I gathered the papers, the photos, the receipt, the ultrasound, slid them back into my bag with the wooden box that had learned the curve of my hip. The phone screen dimmed and went black. Somewhere behind the trees, a boat horn sounded low and long. I sat until the smell of garlic faded and the lights decided on tired. Then I stood and walked toward the car, the river at my shoulder keeping pace, the night settling the way night does when it understands you've decided to keep your eyes open. I drove home with the river's salt taste still in my mouth and set my bag on the kitchen table the way you set down a sleeping child, careful not to wake what you can't soothe. The wooden box bumped the tabletop and settled. I pulled the chair out and sat. Then I did what hands do when the mind needs somewhere to stand. I made a list. Time, place, people. Phone calls, receipts, the clip from Mrs. Carpenter's doorbell camera, the ultrasound strip. Paige's voice inside my phone. He hit her low. I wrote down the date of Lily's first appointment and the words Brandon had used at the hospital accident, as if a word could bleach a bruise. When the list was neat enough to hold its own weight, I phoned Mrs. Carpenter and asked if she could sit with Caleb for a couple of hours. I'll bring coloring books, she said, and arrived with 3 and a bag of lemon cookies because help has to be edible for Southerners to trust it. Chatham County's precinct sits on a block that was never meant to be important but learned. The lobby had 2 rows of plastic chairs, a drinks machine with the same 5 choices it's had for 15 years, and a bulletin board whose corners bristled with stapled paper. I gave my name to the desk officer and said I need to speak to whoever handles domestic cases that turn into funerals. He didn't flinch. Detective Ruiz is available, he said, and buzzed a door. Detective Carmen Ruiz had a plain gold band on her finger-scuffed boots and a kind of attention that makes you stop explaining before you start. She led me to a room with a table, 2 chairs, and the kind of light that believes in facts. When she set a small recorder on the table, she looked at me and not at it. I'm going to record your statement, Ms. Hart, she said. One-party consent applies in Georgia. You can record me, I can record you. We'll build the timeline together, and then I'll tell you what I can ask for. I nodded. My daughter's name is Lily Hart, I said to the machine, because that's how you begin when you don't know how to begin. We built the hour the way carpenters frame a wall. I handed over the pharmacy receipt, the list of appointments, the printed photos from Harbor House, the ultrasound, the doorbell clip, the wooden box. Ruiz slid each item into a clear sleeve labeled, dated, initialed, every movement precise. When I played the audio of Paige at the food truck court, Ruiz didn't blink or scribble. She let the words sit and then said, please send me the original file unedited and the metadata with it. She'll try to walk it back, I said. She can try, Ruiz said. But you're handing me corroboration. Medical, physical, digital. It's more than a story. I gave her Dr. Nandakumar's card. She can't tell me much, I said. She did tell me enough. We can subpoena medical records, Ruiz said, and the hospital's discharge decisions. We can request security logs, smart device activity door sensors, anything with a clock attached that night. We can pull cell pings if a judge agrees we've got probable cause. She didn't oversell it. She ran the list like a grocery itemization, this and this and this. Caleb's with me, I said. I'll keep him as long as I can, but family violence orders can include temporary custody, she said. We'll coordinate with the magistrate. If the father becomes a suspect in a violent felony, there are paths. She didn't promise the paths would be paved. She didn't have to. She slid a form across the table. Grief scrambles details, she said. Write everything you remember about the argument you saw in the footage. Don't fix it. Don't beautify it. Just put it down. I wrote porch light off and the timestamp and thump like a fist finding drywall and felt ridiculous for comparing sounds until I remembered sound is how bodies learn danger. We drove to the house on Habersham in her unmarked sedan because she wanted context and I had the keys. On the way, she asked simple questions and let them stay simple. How long had she been married? 2 years. Any prior calls to police? Not by her, by neighbors. Not that reached me. She nodded at the road like she was nodding at the answers. The entry was as I had left it. Lemon cleaner, a stack of magazines about kitchens Lily had never had time to dream out loud. Ruiz pulled on gloves and asked me to stand in the doorway and point. Where does she keep her things? Here. Where did you find the box? Top drawer. Any recent paint? The wall by the stairs looks newer than it should. She bent near the stair. An oblong on the drywall flashed slightly duller under the hall light. Patch and paint, she said, not quite to herself. We'll photograph it and cut it out with a warrant if a judge lets me. She took pictures from 4 angles, then crouched so low I thought she was going to listen to the floor. In the master bath, she opened the cabinet under the sink and found what anyone might find: cotton balls, a hairdryer, 2 bottles of something promising youth. In the trash were 2 cardboard sleeves, collapsed flat bruise gel, brand name peeking out, and a toe from a box that once held shapewear. She bagged each like a gem. Buying isn't a crime, she said, but timeline is a language. Purchases speak. In the kitchen, she photographed the side of the refrigerator where I'd pinned the receipt between the starfish magnet and the field trip form. Then she photographed the field trip form because detail is where a defense learns to stutter. Do you want to walk him through? She asked. And I saw my daughter at 5 dragging a hand along this same baseboard, explaining to the air how the house would understand her when people didn't. No, I said, which she accepted the way people accept weather. Back at the precinct, we sat again. Ruiz typed up an affidavit while I watched the second hand climb the wall clock. She wrote in a clean print that suggested she'd been raised by teachers. When she slid the paper over for me to read the portion that was mine, my name sat so squarely on the line it felt like it had found the home it had been trying to rent for a week. I'll send this across the street, she said, meaning the courthouse. We'll also request a forensic download of Mr. Cole's phone and work devices. We'll ask for the neighbor's full resolution footage and any other cameras on the block. We'll interview Ms. Monroe formally. You don't contact her again, please. I won't, I said and meant it. We didn't speak about lilies or magnolias. We didn't speak about songs that play themselves at midnight. I went home with a white copy of my statement and incident number and a card with a phone number that would get me past the desk when I couldn't sleep. On the way, I stopped on Broughton and stepped into a florist's the size of a pantry. The cooler door sighed out air that smelled like something the year forgot to ruin. I pointed at a magnolia wreath, glossy leaves tight as promises. The owner slid it onto the counter, wrapped it in brown paper, and asked for a name for the card. No name, I said. Just write, some truths don't drown. He set his pen down between us like a question. I nodded. He tied the card to the wire with tidy knots because even messages know they have to hold. I didn't take the wreath home. I gave the florist the address of Cole Development and asked for an afternoon delivery to the front desk. I paid cash. When I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the air felt like a steamed shirt. At the house, Caleb had colored the same dinosaur 3 times, each version greener than the last. He held my hand and told me his favorite parts: the teeth, the tail, the part where it doesn't pretend to be friendly. I made him a sandwich and cut it into triangles because triangles mean somebody cared enough to slow down. He ate one and saved the other in a napkin for later, the way Lily used to do when she didn't trust afternoons to be generous. Evening laid itself over the block like a second skin. I bathed Caleb and set him in Lily's old t-shirt and read him the book with the bear who doesn't like winter. He slept with his hand flung open, palm up, as if the night might drop kindness if he asked it right. Down in the kitchen, I set the wooden box on the table again and rested my hand on its lid. The house clicked and settled. The ice maker coughed once and was done. I laid out the white copy of my statement, the incident card, the receipt for the wreath. I poured water into the kettle and waited for the whistle, not because I wanted tea, but because it's good to choose a sound you can stand. The phone on the wall buzzed with an unknown number. I lifted it, said my name. Detective Ruiz's voice came through even and near. She didn't qualify or dramatize. She gave 3 short sentences and asked whether I could be reached if she needed me. I said yes. We said goodnight like people who had learned not to borrow from tomorrow. I hung up. The kettle trilled. I turned off the flame and let the kitchen go quiet. Upstairs, a child kept sleeping. On the table, a box kept its shape. The magnolia leaves in the florist's cooler would hold their gloss until someone opened a door and let air do its work. The call from Detective Ruiz came just after dawn, spare and unadorned. By the time the sun pushed its first clean line across my kitchen floor, patrol cars had nosed into the coal development lot like gulls to a tide line. I didn't go. I poured cereal for Caleb, tied his shoes, and walked him to the car while the morning made itself ordinary on purpose. Chatham County State Court ran cold, even in July. Everyone wore their best version of plain. I sat near the front palms flat on my skirt to keep them from visiting my bag for the wooden box that didn't need me to hold it. The district attorney's assistant, a woman with a calm, square jaw, checked her files, then checked them again. Across the aisle, Brandon took his seat at counsel table in a suit that tried to remember how to fit a confident man. He kept his chin tucked, eyes sliding off edges. When the judge entered the room, adjusted its spine. Names were read, charges set in a voice trained to make words carry: aggravated assault, felony battery, homicide. The clerk's pen scratched each line into the day like a needle. The DA stood and laid out what could be said. On the first morning, the medical evidence, the pattern of injury, the doorbell clip that made the porch light tell time, the pharmacy purchases speaking where silence had done its work. She didn't raise her voice. She hardly moved. Paige took the stand in a gray dress that refused to decide whether it was armor or apology. Her testimony came out in clean, thin threads. She described the argument, the shove, the single blow, the way she stood frozen at a threshold no one had built for her on purpose. Defense tried to unspool her, asked about jealousy, about motive, about the currency of regret. She didn't shatter. She didn't shine. She told what she had seen and stepped down. The judge considered bail with the attention of someone counting breath. The DA asked for remand. The defense asked for home confinement and monitors and promises. The judge looked at the file for a long stretch that taught the room patience, then ordered Brandon held. A deputy touched his elbow, and the small motion of that touch, carrying him toward the door, altered the room's air. He turned his head once as he passed, but whatever message he intended never found a receiver. Outside, the day had warmed into its regular brightness. Reporters leaned on questions. I didn't give them anything. On the steps, I crouched to Caleb's height and buttoned the snap he'd missed at the top of his shirt. He pressed his palm flat to my cheek, as if to make sure I was the same temperature as the afternoon. "Can we go home?" he asked. We could. Savannah's cemetery holds shade like a promise. Later, after lunch and quiet, I carried a bunch of white hydrangeas along the path, Lily and I used to walk when she wanted to tell the long version of a story. I set the flowers at the base of her stone, smoothed the ribbon with my thumb, and said her name aloud, once the way you set a plate in front of someone and wait for them to begin. The ground held steady under my shoes. Wind got lost in the live oak and decided to stay. Days found their shape. I kept the kitchen warm and the washing machine busy. I folded Caleb's t-shirts in stacks that kept tilting and righting themselves like boats. At night, when the house quieted into its slow clicks, the wooden box slept under the telephone shelf where Lily used to drop her keys. Sometimes I lifted the lid and let the ultrasound strip uncoil, not as evidence, not as argument, but the way a person holds a photograph until it settles the heartbeat. I went to Safe Harbor on a Wednesday because doors were open on Wednesdays. The lobby had a rug a child had spilled juice on, and staff who had decided not to chase stains out of carpet for a living. I signed my name on a sheet without lines and asked for whatever needed hands. In the kitchen, a woman whose hair was pinned with the kind of clip that means business showed me the pantry. We made a pot of chicken and rice big enough to ask for help lifting. Another volunteer set out cornbread on paper plates. People took what they could eat, and no one apologized for not finishing. In the afternoons, I folded donations, jeans with honest knees, blouses that had decided to forgive a season someone else had lived through. I cut flyers along faint blue lines and thumbtacked them to cork numbers to call doors, to try someone's name to say when the voice on the line asked a question too big for the moment. A girl with a backpack full of notebooks sat beside me one day and asked if the river always smelled like salt. Most days, I said. We sat with that. Letters came, one from the DA with dates, one from the clinic with a copy of a form Lily had signed, two from people I didn't know who sent prayer cards heavy with foil. I answered the ones that asked for answers and set the others under the boxwood lid for later. When Detective Ruiz phoned, her updates were unadorned. A warrant served a data pull complete, a lab confirming what the eye had already learned. We spoke briefly. We hung up. The line went back to being a line. At supper, Caleb told me which dinosaurs would have liked Savannah if they'd had the chance. He decided on the ones with tails built for balance and habits built for hiding. I set a plate in front of him and another one in front of the place where Lily liked to sit when the evening made room. Hydrangeas browned slowly in the vase by the window petals curling inward to keep their color longer than they had a right to. On a Sunday, I walked past St. Bartholomew's and stood under the eaves where the fans pushed the heat aside in charitable circles. The magnolia wreath from the funeral had been replaced by something seasonal and bright. The glass threw colored rectangles onto the floor, and I stepped one to the next, the way a child does, using them for a path. When I reached the door, I put my palm to the wood and felt the cool pass into my skin. The day kept going. So did we. The river lifted and set itself down. The fans in the sanctuary kept their rhythm. I went home, put water on for tea, and sat at the kitchen table while the kettle built its song. Caleb's crayons rolled and stopped. The wooden box kept its weight under my hand, steady as a heart that insisted on its job. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.